Welcome back on Peacemaker 360. I'm your host Christian Chito, and today I'm in the studio with Katie Coldwell. She earned a BA in Social Welfare and Justice and Theology at Marquette University, and in 2010 she joined Mary No Lay Missionaries in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where she worked with incarcerated women and providing to them social and legal services, advocacy and education. And by the time she was leaving Brazil, she co-founded an urban agriculture project that was geared towards supporting women in the penitentiary. So we are very glad to have you today, Katie, and thank you very much for answering.
Thank you so much, Chito. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you today. How do you feel?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm just very grateful for you for hosting me on this show, and I look forward to sharing a bit about my experience in peace building, and also continuing to watch your show and learn about the experience of my fellow peace builders.
Thank you so much for that, Katie. And indeed, that's the purpose of the show. We want to learn from one another. We want to hear, even for you viewers, what do you think about some of the issues that we discuss, and can you also give us your feedback? So today we're going to start with your own journey as a peace builder, Katie. When did it begin, and what pulled you into peace building? Why do you do these things?
Sure. Thank you so much for your question. When I think about peace building, I think most of us have a peace builder within us that we don't even know we are cultivating. And so when I think back on my experiences working with poor or marginalized groups, I find it difficult to pinpoint the moment that I knew I was a peace builder, or I could identify as a peace builder. But I can think about moments where I remember working with poor or marginalized groups and thinking, this is the kind of work I want to keep doing. So I'm thinking about, for example, when I was 12 years old, I went with my mother to work at a homeless shelter in downtown Minneapolis. And I remember being really moved by that experience of understanding that there was people my age, just like me, living in such abject poverty in my own city. And getting back into the car and asking my mom, what do I need to do to keep doing this kind of work for the rest of my life? I felt very motivated and obligated to make a commitment to bettering the lives of other people who are suffering so close to where I am.
Indeed, there's so many people suffering so close to all of us. And when you think about peace building, it's so interesting to hear you say that it also started very young, and it's something that it's hard sometimes to identify what is it or when that happened, but you can still remember some of these moments in your childhood, and that's so fascinating. So did you continue going to the shelters, the homeless shelters?
With my church, yes. I did continue going to the homeless shelter, but I think that led me on a trajectory that I knew I wanted to do something that was faith-based, but also working with the poor and marginalized. So I always just kept those two concepts very close to my heart and close to my mind and close to my vision of what I wanted to do as a young person in the world.
Very fascinating. Thank you very much, Katie, for that. Another thing I'm very curious to hear about, because when I was reading your resume and looking back at your profile, is that you have joined the Mary No Lay Missionaries in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2010, and you've been working with incarcerated women. Why incarcerated women? We're talking about poor people. As you start your journey as a peace builder, you're interested with marginalized communities. Why did you focus particularly on incarcerated women?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. I'm happy that you asked me that, because I never planned on focusing on incarcerated women. And also this question of why incarcerated women was a question I often received from Brazilians when I was in Brazil, mas por que mulheres encarceradas? Like, why incarcerated women? Because it didn't make sense. These women weren't necessarily deserving of the ministries that the missionaries were providing. A common response I often got was, well, don't those women deserve to be there? And the truth is, like, no, they don't. None of us deserve to be completely dehumanized, to be subjected to such terrible conditions, to have our stripped of our dignity. No one deserves that. So the work that I was doing there with Mary No Lay Missioners was actually with a very particular group of incarcerated women, and these are women that were incarcerated for international drug trafficking. So they're women that are commonly classified as drug mules. But actually, what I came to understand through my work and through the work of the nonprofit that I was associated with, is that many of these women are often victims of human trafficking. They are coerced, manipulated, forced into carrying drugs, threatened with their lives or have their children's lives threatened. And there are also women that are coming from situations of extreme poverty where they don't have a financial option other than to traffic drugs. So these are the kind of women that I was working with. 53 different countries were represented among the 600 women that I worked with, and I was visiting them at least 2 to 3 times a week, the same population of women.
Very, very interesting indeed. When you talk about how many of the women that have been incarcerated have been involved in drug trafficking, and they're also victims of human trafficking, I'm very fascinated by how a vicious cycle has been created around, you're a victim, but also you're also a perpetrator to some extent, because you are involved in some crime. But do you think this is something that the Brazilian government handles, especially trying to break that cycle of human trafficking and drug trafficking? What is it that the Brazilian government does to try to address these issues that are structural?
And unfortunately, the Brazilian government claims to be fighting this war on drugs when they're incarcerating these women. Oh, we've incarcerated some of the people who are trafficking drugs. We're working to fight the war on drugs. But actually what they're doing is they're taking, as if you had a totem pole, they're sort of like cutting off the bottom part of the totem pole, but the rest of the structure still exists. So the people, the drug lords back in the home countries, the people who are producing the drugs, the people who are in Brazil who are moving the women around, sending them back to their home countries with drugs, all of those other members of the web still exist. They're only incarcerating these women. And so what that says to me is that these women's lives are worthless. They mean nothing. They can be spent, and they spend them by using them as decoys often to let other drug traffickers with heavier, larger quantities of drugs pass through the system. So they're really not, the Brazilian government really isn't getting to the root of the issue. And it's also not, the issue is also not being addressed on international level. While there are like many recommendations by the United Nations stating that women, talking about the rights of women prisoners and also talking about victims of human trafficking, that link between human trafficking and drug trafficking, and recognizing that sometimes these two paths cross, that link hasn't quite been made in a legal form. So unfortunately, that's still part of the struggle, and I'm happy to say that the organization I worked with, Instituto Terra, Trabalho e Cidadania, they continue to do this work to try to advocate for legislative reform on behalf of women incarcerated for international drug trafficking.
Interesting and very fascinating indeed, because when you're mentioning the work that you've done also, as you've just briefly mentioned, is you've worked to provide social and legal services, advocacy and education to the women who have been incarcerated. And you've mentioned the name of the organization. I'm wondering how easy has it been for the organization to carry this kind of work? Because I know it's very risky, and I know how they manage to reach to the women.
Sure, and I appreciate that question. As you can imagine, it's not easy. One, because we're actually the only organization in the entire country of Brazil that was working on this issue. There are other organizations that work on issues of drug trafficking or issues of incarceration, but no one that specifically worked personally with women incarcerated for international drug trafficking. So it's a very unique population that we are working with. So in that sense, we really are the only organization that can speak directly to the plight of these women and the struggles of these women. Secondly, you have the issue of funding, obviously. Incarceration isn't exactly, and the rights of the incarcerated isn't exactly an issue that's popular to fund, although that is gaining momentum now in the US. Over the last couple of years, there's a lot of push for reforming the incarceration system in the United States. Brazil has not gotten to that point yet. There's also a very punitive culture in Brazil from the way child rearing up until adulthood. The culture is one of punishing people for what they do, and also what we call marginalizing of the poor. So marginalização de pobreza, or incarceração de pobreza, like incarcerating poverty, essentially. So poor people, when they don't have any other option, commit a crime. Incarceration is also seen as a way of just eliminating these people, just eliminating the problem by incarcerating the people. And as we know, that doesn't eliminate the problem. That only leads to more problems, which is weight on our legal and justice system. It causes it doesn't exactly fix the problem. It's just getting rid of some of the symptoms of some deeper social issues that Brazil is experiencing.
It's so powerful in it. It's just like, as people say, you're looking at the tip of the iceberg rather than looking at the very cause. The fundamental problem is still existent. And it's so fascinating indeed to hear you share your experience. I'm learning a lot, and I know many viewers are also getting a lot from you. But thinking about your current position right now, you're doing your Master's in International Peace Studies here at the Kroc. What do you think you would like to do as you move forward, and how does that connect with your past experience working with incarcerated women in Brazil?
Sure, definitely. I first want to say just thank you so much to viewers out there who are watching this, and also thank you so much to the Kroc Institute for allowing me to study here. I feel so incredibly privileged to be studying with such an amazing group of young people who are also committed to peace building, and also just to be studying with such an amazing faculty at this wonderful university that's really committed to transforming the world through social justice and through peace building. So I just want to acknowledge the Kroc Institute for giving me so much and allowing me to be here with you today. As far as what I'd like to do after Kroc and how it connects with my previous field experience, I'm really interested in looking at the nexus between the Catholic Church and peace building. I see the Catholic Church, as a Catholic myself, I see the Catholic Church as a lot of unactualized potential. So I see some of the things the Catholic Church is doing. They have so much momentum and so much possibility to transform the structures of the church to lean towards peace building, to be more involved in peace building dialogues, to engage more deeply on issues that are connected to peace building. However, the church hasn't quite actualized that potential yet. And so I'm really interested to see how religious leaders, church leaders in particularly, can be involved in interreligious dialogues, to see how church leaders can bring civil society into peace-building discussions and get civil society on board with peace-building efforts. And I really believe in the church as an instrument or as a vehicle to improve peace building and efforts towards peace building. And so I'd like to work in that capacity, somehow connected to the church and what I'm doing, but also connected to real people who are part of the church, who are part of this instrument.
It's so powerful to hear you say that, because indeed the church has a critical role to play in trying to promote some of these, address some of these injustices that are happening in our world. And I know one thing regarding the church, the Catholic Church today. We know that Pope Francis himself has been very, very vocal recently, trying to talk about some of the issues in terms of, like, human trafficking. He's been very influential in trying to bring other religious leaders from across the world to talk about some of these issues. And I think you're right. The church has some potential that needs to be tapped on, but at the same time I know that it's not very easy. The work of working within the church also is very complex. Do you think, and sometimes it takes a long time before you can see any action taking place. How would you deal with that kind of frustration? Because it's normal for that to happen. And as much as we want immediate responses, sometimes it takes long because of the bureaucracy and because of the way things run. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and it's a really good point that you bring up, and that's something that I've actually learned a lot about at the Kroc Institute, is this concept of strategic peace building. And a strategic peace builder is someone that's going to look at connecting different players on different levels to create a network and coalition that can be more effective at peace building. So, in my opinion, the problem with the Catholic Church is that we aren't well organized at this point. We do get caught up in bureaucracy. We're not able to break from our mold and think more creatively outside the box about ways we can approach and engage with these dialogues of peace building. And so for me, I'm really looking for how I can be part of creating a new structure within a structure that perhaps is a bit outdated at this point, or perhaps doesn't serve the purpose as well as it could. It doesn't help us get closer to peace building in the way that we would like to be. So I see the Catholic Church, I see a possibility for forming more networks, organizing itself better, making use of the resources we have at both local levels and also top level leadership to create structures and organizations that are going to promote peace building and be more involved in peace building efforts.
Fascinating, Coach Kitty. Thank you so much for sharing today. And I know many of our viewers are interested in the discussion that we've had here today. But before we close, because we're running short of time, is there any let me say proverb or any saying that you've learned during your time in Brazil that you'd like to share with us that somehow connects or echoes some of the things that we've been discussing here today?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that. There's nothing that comes to mind specifically. One thing that I'm thinking about that strikes me personally, and I often would carry with me in my work that I was doing with the women, this expression "força mulher," which means it literally translates to strength woman. But how I interpret it is almost like a sending forth, like sending one forward with strength. And it was a message that women would also often share with one another if they're having a difficult day in prison, and something that women would also often say to me as I was leaving the prison, just "força mulher," we got this. And so I often carry that message with me, and it's something that I hold close to me, and I actually have it tattooed on me because it meant so much to me, this phrase, "força mulher." Just a constant reminder that each woman has inside of her the strength that she needs to go forward, and each woman has inside of her the potential to be an incredible peace builder.
Are men included in Força Mulher?
Yes, mine can be included, or you're welcome to say "força mulher" to me anytime, Chito.
Yes, Força Mulher, Kitty.
Thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure having you today on Peacemaker 360. Thank you so much for taking your time, and thank you for the sharing. And if people are interested in getting to connect with you, how can they get to you?
Sure, you're welcome to connect with me. My email address is catherine.coldwell@gmail.com. You're welcome to connect with me there. I also have a YouTube channel that you're welcome to look me up, Katie Coldwell. And so I'm happy to field questions and continue to support fellow peace builders on their journey, as you have all done for me. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.